So a ton of rules updates today then. We have FAQs for the core book, the Munitorum Handbook, and also a bunch of power level adjustments. There's quite a lot of changes to unpack. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. So there were quite a few things that were awaiting an FAQ from the core book, and plenty of things do seem to have been addressed. 5 FAQs have been issued, so let's go through them all and see what we've got. So first of all, we've got the changes to the core book, several important issues were addressed, and also a bunch of extra rare rules were added to set some general clarifications for niche scenarios. We'll go through them in a second. There's a bunch of changes to the Munitorum Handbook, plenty of entries have either been added or removed, and points changes have been swapped or brought in line for some others. Next we have a slightly hilarious and pretty excessive document which is 64 pages of power level adjustments. I believe that they will come automatically to the 40k app in time. Mine doesn't seem to have updated yet, and to be honest that might be a fair bit easier to use than this. They've basically done it Munitorum Handbook style, basically listed every single unit in the army and the different unit sizes and the different power ratings that unit will have with those different unit sizes. I think they've largely done this for game balance, because since 8th started, it is kind of true that power level has got grossly out of step with points changes over the course of the last few years, so I do suspect some update was probably needed. However, I'm really not sure that this was the best way to go about it, and maybe they should have just let things sit until the actual 9th edition codexes come out. To my mind, power level's only kind of supposed to be a rough guide anyway. The sort of thing when you want to reduce complexity, not add to it, so making anyone who needs power level either have to pay for the app subscription or have to trawl through a massive 64-page document doesn't really seem to be the most easy accessible thing in the world. Seeing as I'm happy with points costs, I'll be happy with using these power level ratings myself, but it does kind of add one extra thing to keep track of, rather than just using the simple numbers in the top left hand corner of the datasheet. Looks like quite a lot of effort has been put into it, but I'm not sure it was the most necessary update they've made. They have FAQ'd Saga of the Beast. You can now use custom jobs without a Mechboy workshop, which is a bit of a relief to be honest. It would have made the Orc army significantly worse and a lot less fun. However, for whatever reason, maybe because they weren't informed of it, they haven't yet fixed the weird FAQ where they appear to have given Defenders of Humanity the OBSEC rule to basically every unit in the Space Wolves army, aside from Beasts and Servitors. It's actually quite a big implication, seeing as Space Wolves being OBSEC can make it incredibly scary when you have Wolfen everywhere, and can be an absolute nightmare to try and clear them off any objectives. I do think that it is an omission and it's not intentional, but it's a shame that they didn't choose this moment to correct it. Finally, they've got an FAQ for the Grand Tournament Mission Pack. The vast majority of it is just reprinting FAQ changes to the core rulebook, but there are a couple of extra bits clarifying some secondaries. Basically, it does need to be the same model that does the Psychic Ritual secondary over and over again, but it can be different ones that do the Scramblers secondary. To be honest, that would have been the way that I would have played it anyway based on the rules, so I'm not sure that's really a change as such. So let's get into the biggest changes here then. We've got the core book FAQ. One obvious oversight that a lot of people had picked up on was that Smite could be technically multicast by the same Psyker over and over again. They've put a stop to that. They haven't chosen to give Grey Knight or Thousand Sons their Smite privileges back though. They will still be limited by the number of casting, just like any other army at the moment. Next we have Lookout Sir. Basically you could have a weird scenario before where if you had 2 vehicle characters next to each other, then provided they weren't the closest units to the enemy army, they could technically sort of screen from each other in a way that characters generally can't. They've fixed this by saying that for a character to be non-targetable, you need to be not the closest unit, and also within 3 inches of a unit of 3 or more models, or a vehicle or monster of 10 wounds or more. That will put a stop to the fairly silly situation of something like 2 Dark Angels Talon Masters making each other untargetable, obviously provided you've got units in the midfield. But I think for more normal circumstances it's a bit of a step back. Say if you have, say, a Dark Eldar Archon and he's next to 4 Venoms, then you're still going to be just able to shoot that Archon dead anyway if he doesn't have an infantry unit nearby or something. I think I would have just made it so character vehicles don't screen character vehicles myself. They've added a few rules for fortifications, specify that you can't put them in strategic reserves, not that I'm sure how that would have worked anyway, and they also can't be deployed within 3 inches of terrain. If there's no room to set them up, then they're automatically destroyed. Kind of makes it a bit risky to bring something like a Fortress of Redemption if you don't know how much terrain's going to be on the board. In the actions rules, they've clarified that you can only do 1 action per battle round. I guess just to doubly underline that you can't just have 1 squad sitting there doing multiple actions at the same time. They've come down and clarified obscuring terrain, meaning that if you are within it, then you can be shot by people outside it. It's only obscuring for things that are actually behind the terrain. I think that was a little bit of a grey area the way that they'd worded it, so it's good to have that completely tied up. They fixed the wording mistake that they made with heavy cover. Obviously it gives the extra bonus to the saving throw if you weren't the model charging, although they'd implied the opposite from the wording, and you don't gain the benefit to the saving throw if you were the model that charged. Finally, they've added 5 rare rules for niche circumstances. Firstly, they've clarified that desperate breakout can be prevented if the enemy unit has, say, a rule that keeps it in combat, such as the White Scar's Master of Snares Warlord trait, for example. Although, as far as I can tell, this doesn't actually clear up the issue as to whether or not you can use desperate breakout with a model that's got a 0-inch move. Quite a relevant example is that you might want to auto-destroy a drop pod by trying to make a fallback move of 0 inches and then destroy it, rather than allow the enemy to hug the drop pod in close combat and make their own unit untargetable. I think rules as written you technically can use the stratagem at the moment, and you could auto-destroy your drop pod if you wanted, but I think it would be good to have that one clarified. Next we have manifesting priority. There's a few rare rules that allow you to either auto-cast a psychic power or auto-deny one, and the casting takes precedence over the denying. When you've got a weapon that can also inflict some mortal wounds, such as Space Marine sniper rifles on 6s, you resolve all the damage of the regular attacks and then move on to any mortal wounds caused, which I think does make sense, as it doesn't allow your opponent to chop and choose between the 2 attacks and maybe negate some of the damage. Next we have a clarification on scoring additional hits, which was an FAQ from 8th edition I believe. Basically some rules allow you to score additional hits on a 6 for example in close combat. And just like 8th, they've ruled it that if you score those hits on 6s, then they don't count as being 6s themselves, because say for some other special rules, you might have, say, the Black Templars auto-wounding on the roll of a 6. The additional hits don't actually count as having been rolled as a hit roll at all, so don't gain any other benefit from extra rules that apply to that hit roll. Finally, they've clarified the command point regeneration limit. That's the one that allows you to only regenerate 1 command point from abilities such as warlord traits and things per battle round, in addition to the one that you already get for the command phase. They have clarified that the stratagems can bypass that, so say if you kill a character with an assassin and use the stratagem that allows them to get command points from that, then that can be in addition to the command point that you get from other rules. Again, this is how it was in 8th edition. So in general, mainly niche special rules there. The smite one was important as a bit of an oversight. Probably the biggest actual rules change is the Lookout Sir one, meaning that certain small vehicle armies won't be able to screen characters anywhere near as easily. Not sure if that was the most sensible change in my mind, and will make characters even easier to target, but I guess it is what it is. Moving on, we come to the changes in the Munitorum Handbook, and there are some interesting ones. Firstly, there's standardised points costs in line for a bunch of war gear. Dark Angels multi-melters, Space Wolf suppressors, and Grey Knight flamestorm cannons all had different costs. They're all the same as standard Codex Space Marines now, and the same goes for the Admech Heavy Flamer. The Chaos Knights have had their version of the Castellan with the Volcano Lance and Plasma Decimator brought in line too, as for some reason it costs a lot more than the Imperial version. There's some bad news for Orcs again in the deleted entries section. The Grey Knights have lost their Brotherhood champion, which is a shame but maybe not the most taken selection ever, but the Orcs have lost their War Boss on Warbike. The Errata simply says to delete this entry. It's a real blow to the Orc army to be honest. I'd argue it's the most competitive way to run the War Boss at the moment, and once again with his rocky road throughout 8th edition he'll be sorely missed. The only other deleted entry is the Sentinel Powerlifter weapon, which makes sense because Imperial Guard Sentinel Powerlifters don't have the points cost in, so are presumably going to Legends. On a bit more of a positive note, entries have been added for a bunch of units, presumably ones that Games Workshop forgot about when writing the book to start with. I'm not surprised to see that Canoptic Spiders are back. It seems a bit unlikely that they'd go away seeing as they're a recent plastic kit, and we've already seen that they've been repackaged for 9th edition. In any case, they've gone up 5 points, so more or less in line with the standard points rises throughout the game. We've also got entries here for the Towered Advanced Guardian drones, the Hellforged Vindicator, the Charybdis Assault Claw, Big Mech Busgob, Zadsnark the Ripper, who presumably is the only model of that bike boss that Forge World Cell is going to represent now, and the regular Squiggoth and his Gorin Horns. They've added a bunch of war gear costs, a lot of which are 0, and a lot of which seem to pertain to various Forge World contraptions. Finally, just a couple of Forge World points costs have been updated. The Taunar Supremacy armor has gone up from 750 to 1040, which I think is due to his guns going down in points cost. I think they just didn't realise that they basically made most of his guns fairly cheap without increasing his points cost whatsoever in return. So not the best news from that guy, unfortunately. And 2 of the Imperial Knight chassis that saw some very weirdly high points increases have gone down to be more in line with the other standard Questor chassis of Imperial Knight. So overall, a solid amount of updates here, although I'd argue that a few slipped through their fingers. I'd say that most of the issues from the core book are addressed now, though I think that the Space Wolves Defenders of Humanity thing should probably get fixed, and also Grey Knights and Thousand Suns should probably have their smite exemption back, as it's taken away some of the core features of both armies. For the points changes it mainly seems sensible, though I am sorry to see the War Boss on Warbike go away. So let me know your thoughts on the changes down in the comments below. It'll be really interesting to hear what you have to say, or if there's anything else that needs fixing. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to the channel. I have regular 40k content coming out every single day. Finally, if you'd like to help support the channel and keep these videos coming, I do have a Patreon page, which you can find a link to down in the video description. As well as supporting the creation of new content, channel patrons also get to see one video early each week. There's regular polls to see what sort of things I work on next, and there's also regular prize draws with some big prizes posted out at the start of every month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, then the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.